Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I'm the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. Hope you had a fantastic weekend. Here we are on Monday. Do you realize how close we are to Christmas? Um, the New Year? Wow. I've said this before. It's stunning to me how quickly how the year has gotten away. I mean, it's just absolutely amazing. And yet here we are. So, thank you again for joining me here on this Monday morning and morning musings. So, we are continuing our overview, our summary of our extensive study of the Olivet Discourse. We have looked quite closely at some of the key passages in the Olivet Discourse. We've spent a lot of good time both in the extensive study and in the summary on Matthew chapter 24, verse 34, and Matthew chapter 24, 35, and verse 36, showing that there is not a change of subject in Matthew 24, either verse 35 or verse 36, from the foregoing discussion of the coming of the Son of Man at the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70 versus a supposed, and I would say, imaginary end of time coming. There is no change of subject there, ladies and gentlemen. And listen to me. If there's no change of subject from Christ coming in AD 70 to Christ's supposed coming at the end of time, if it's not found in the Olivet Discourse, I want to suggest to you that such a doctrine cannot be found anywhere in the New Testament. That's how critical the Olivet Discourse truly is. It's the foundation of Paul's eschatology, because Matthew 24 draws on the Old Testament, just like Paul said his eschatology was from the Old Testament. There is no disconnect, all right? There's no dichotomization between the Olivet Discourse, Paul's eschatology, Peter's eschatology, John's eschatology. As a matter of fact, many commentators, please pay attention to this and catch the power of this. Many commentators, Charles Worth, Malcolm, others, have taken note of the fact that, okay, in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, we have the Olivet Discourse. We come to the book of John, and we don't have the Olivet Discourse. But we do have the book of Revelation, which is the expanded version of the Olivet Discourse. So that tells us, if that suggestion is true, and like I said, many scholars take that position. So if Revelation is the expanded version, John's version of the Olivet Discourse, then since we have demonstrated that the Olivet Discourse does not have a discussion of the end of time, then that means Revelation doesn't have a discussion of the end of time, unless John just throws some discussion of that into the book without telling us about it. And he doesn't. So, with all of that said, we now come to Matthew chapter 24, 37 and following. After saying, this generation shall by no means pass away until all of these things are fulfilled, and all of those things refer to his coming, the coming of the Son of Man on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. After saying, this generation will not pass, after saying, heaven and earth shall pass, and I've shared with you how that reference to heaven and earth is a reference to the temple itself. I've shared with you quotes from scholars who acknowledge that the temple was called heaven and earth. Even Greg Beale acknowledges that. And after saying, but of that day and hour knows no man, and that means they could know the generation, but not the day and hour of that generation. He then says, Matthew chapter 24, verse 37. That in the days of the coming of the Son of Man, let me read that. I just had a brain burp, if you please. And so I want to get the exact wording correctly. But as the days of Noah were, so also shall the coming of the Son of Man be. Have to pardon me. Now, folks, right here we have a key. Notice I've shared with you how virtually all, not all, but virtually all, amillennialists, reformed amillennialists, postmillennialists, acknowledge that Matthew chapter 24, verse 29 and following, the prediction of the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven, is a reference to AD 70. And by the way, modern scholarship is basically agreed that Matthew chapter 24, 29 to 31, is echoing directly, drawing directly on Daniel chapter 7, 13 and 14, where Daniel said, I saw in the night vision one like unto the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven. And he came before the Ancient of Days, and there was given unto him a kingdom over every nation, kindred, tongue, tribe, and nation. And his kingdom shall never be destroyed. Okay? And once again, let me reiterate this. Virtually all scholars agree that in Matthew chapter 24, Jesus is drawing on Daniel 7. Okay? Daniel 7 predicted the coming of the Son of Man. Now, I grew up believing, I grew up teaching that Daniel chapter 7 and the Son of Man coming before the Ancient of Days to receive the kingdom, I believed and taught that referred to Jesus' ascension. However, after closer examination and doing my own exegetical work, it soon became apparent to me that Daniel 7 has nothing to do with the ascension. Point number one, Daniel chapter 7 is set in the days of the Fourth Empire. That's the Roman Empire. Daniel chapter 7 is set in the context of the arrival, or the rising up, I should say, of the little horn, who would persecute the saints and wear them out. But, and keep in mind, this is in the days of Rome. And listen, folks, we are not in the days of Rome. Period. End of story. So in the days of the Fourth Empire, i.e. Rome, the little horn would arise and persecute the saints. Judgment would be set, the thrones would be set, and the Son of Man comes. To do what? To judge the little horn. That's why the judgment was set. That's why the kingdom was given. That's why the Son of Man came on the clouds of heaven, to judge the little horn. Folks, listen to me. Daniel chapter 7 is a judgment context. And again, I realize that most people look at Daniel chapter 7, 13 and 14 and say, oh, that's the ascension of Christ. When Jesus ascended, he came before the Father and he received the kingdom. Well, here's what's interesting. Craig Keener points out that in the early church, and I'm saying this not because it's the definitive proof, all right? I'm simply pointing this out because people love to say, well, you preterists need to pay more attention to the early church writers. Okay, Craig Keener says in the early church, the earliest church testimony, when the writers appealed to Christ's ascension and enthronement, they did not appeal to Daniel 7. They appealed to Psalms 110. Isn't that amazing? Furthermore, Andreas Stutz, a recognized scholar, takes note of the terminology of the coming of the Son of Man. And he mentions that Jesus used it in some what we would call non-eschatological texts. However, in the New Testament, Andreas Stutz points out that invariably, when Jesus is talking about the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven, it is always, invariably, without exception, his coming in judgment. And if anyone wants that quote and the source of it, I'll be glad to provide it. Now, folks, do you catch the power of this? Are you beginning to connect a dot or two? Remember now, majority of scholars, majority of Bible students acknowledge Matthew chapter 24, 29 and following is AD 70, and it's echoing Daniel chapter 7. Daniel chapter 7 is the coming of the Son of Man on the clouds of heaven for the judgment of the little horn in the days of Rome. Okay, so far so good, right? So you have the commentators agreeing Matthew 24, 29, 31, Daniel 7, the coming of the Son of Man on the clouds, Matthew 24, the judgment of the persecutor, Daniel 7, the coming of the Son of Man on the clouds to judge the persecutor and destroy him. No problem. And most of them see, therefore, Matthew 24, AD 70. It cites Daniel 7, therefore Daniel 7, AD 70, although like I said, you've got a majority probably of scholars saying, well, Daniel 7 was the ascension, although that doesn't work because the ascension was not the judgment of the little horn for persecuting the saints. That's the kicker here. So my point is this. See, I've laid the groundwork here. All of that's introductory. The coming of the Son of Man was to be in the days of the Roman Empire. Now do you see a train coming on Matthew 24, verse 37? For it was as it was in the days of Noah, so also it shall be at the coming of the Son of Man. See, Jesus is not, ladies and gentlemen, he's not changing the subject. Remember, he should have been talking, according to the traditional view of a divided discourse, he should have been talking about a different coming. Instead, he uses the exact same precise terminology, the coming of the Son of Man, Matthew 24, verse 30 and 31, AD 70, and he uses the precise terminology in Matthew 24, verse 37. Were it not for the presupposition that there is a change of subject in verse 35 or verse 36, no one would have ever suggested or even thought about the fact that the coming of the Son of Man in Matthew 24, 37 is a different coming of the Son of Man from that in 24, 29 through 31. But you see, according to Daniel, and you got to catch the power of this, the only place in the Old Testament that foretold the coming of the Son of Man on the clouds of heaven was Daniel 7. Jesus applied Daniel 7 to AD 70. Where is our hermeneutical justification for now saying, well, yeah, that's all true. That we're good with that. But in verse 37, it's the end of time. Where does Jesus change from Daniel 7, days of the Roman Empire, AD 70, to now the end of the Christian age, which has no end? And another coming of the Son of Man. Folks, there is no break. There's no change of subject. There's no change of application. There's no change of definition of the coming of the Son of Man. All right? Thanks for joining me on this Monday morning. We'll see you on the flip side.